You need to be paying attention to what's happening in El Salvador. So you know how I'm always saying that a lot of you have to change your understanding of what authoritarianism can look like because it often maintains the illusion of democracy or even allows for the practice of it, but very conditionally? Yeah, so El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele, just signed a law extending presidential terms to 6 years and getting rid of term limits altogether. So now, if he wants to be president for the rest of his life, he can be. Technically. I need you to keep one thing in mind. There is still democracy in El Salvador. However, let's look at some of the other changes that the El Salvador government has undergone in recent years. If for no other reason, it's always good to know a little bit about your neighbors, but pay close attention. El Salvador's government is set up pretty similarly to the US with some key differences. There's a president that gets elected by the people. There's a legislative body that is unicameral, not bicameral. And they have a Supreme Court, which is made up of 15 judges or magistrates divided into 4 courts. The most important is the Constitutional Court with 5 justices. They actually have 9-year terms and are elected to their position by the legislative body. So as you can imagine, there's of course a lot of politics to their selection. So Bukele won the presidency in 2019, and originally, when he did, presidents could only serve 1 term in El Salvador, according to the Constitution. His party was in the minority in the assembly. However, he made a very big show of his plan to basically clean up the streets of El Salvador, round up a bunch of gang members, etc. In 2020, along with military and police officials, he stormed the legislature and basically demanded approval for a loan needed to fund his whole plan. In 2020, it also came out, thanks to journalists from El Faro, that Bukele allegedly negotiated with the gangs to have them basically slow down on the violence to make his numbers look good. Despite denying these claims, Bukele, of course, called for the imprisonment of these journalists who had to flee the country. Then in 2021, Bukele's party, Nuevas Ideas, or New Ideas, won a majority in the legislature. And this is where it gets interesting. First, they illegally removed the 5 constitutional Supreme Court magistrates and replaced them with their own picks. Soon after that, those Supreme Court justices rule that Bukele can actually run for a 2nd term, despite the fact that it's technically unconstitutional. But you know, everything is still democratic at this point. In 2022, Bukele gets the state legislature to approve his state of emergency, which helps him to suspend the Constitution. So now he starts using the police and military to round people up that he accuses of being in gangs. And here's the thing, many people in El Salvador are happy with this. Yes, this is a popular move right now, despite the fact that these men are unable to defend themselves in a court of law. So an accusation is as good as a conviction. And of course, Bukele is backed by state-run media that confirms all of his claims and successes. In 2023, it gets interesting again. His party currently controls 2/3 of the assembly, and they decide to pass electoral reform, which cuts the number of seats by 1/3. But don't worry, there is still democracy in El Salvador. And in fact, in 2024, there was another election and they won almost every single seat. They also consolidated 262 municipalities and their representatives into 44 consolidated districts. So now any smaller opposition parties have practically no presence. But again, there is still democracy in El Salvador. And remember, Bukele is still popular. He won handily in 2024 with something like 84% of the vote. There is still democracy in El Salvador. And all that brings us to 2025, when Bukele's party just made their latest move, which again, not only extends presidential terms to 6 years, also allows him to run indefinitely. And again, this assembly that they have absolute control over also selects and controls the Supreme Court. There is still democracy in El Salvador. And here's the thing. Yes, Bukele is currently very popular because as he and the assembly and his state-run media machine are telling the people of El Salvador, he's locking the bad guys up. No need for trials. What he's doing is good. Never mind the fact that his critics or journalists that dare to show another side of the story are either imprisoned or run out of the country. He is popular. But this type of consolidation of power isn't done for someone who's popular. This is done by someone who is popular more easily for when they are unpopular. But hey, there's still democracy in El Salvador.